There's a moment that happens when you finally stop chasing someone, not out of anger, not as a tactic, but simply because something inside of you whispers, I deserve better than this. And it's in that quiet shift, that subtle internal redirection, where real emotional power begins to grow, the kind of power that doesn't need to scream or demand, it doesn't need to plead or convince. It just exists, calm, unshakable, real. We're taught early on that effort equals love, that if you show someone how much you care, how available you are, how consistent you can be, eventually they'll come around. So you keep reaching out, you initiate conversation, you make plans, you show up when they're uncertain, offer reassurance when they're distant, and keep trying to prove you're worth staying for. And deep down, you hope all this proving will one day be enough. But chasing someone often has the opposite effect. It doesn't bring them close, it makes them comfortable. They stop feeling the need to invest. They don't have to wonder about you anymore, because you're always right there, ready to fill every silence and smooth every edge. Your presence becomes predictable, your affection becomes expected, and eventually your energy starts to feel like background noise, always there, always dependable, but somehow invisible. And yet the most magnetic version of you is not the one who's constantly trying. It's not the one who anxiously fills every gap with effort. It's the one who knows when to stop, the one who knows when to retreat, not out of spite, but out of self-respect. Because chasing is exhausting, not just physically, but emotionally. It drains your confidence, it chips away at your self-worth, and it keeps you in a state of constant performance, constantly asking, am I enough? Do they see me yet? But the moment you stop chasing, that's when you begin to answer those questions for yourself. You stop needing someone else's attention to feel validated. You stop needing their responses to feel secure. And slowly you begin to rebuild the connection that matters most, the one you have with yourself. There's something powerful about the person who isn't desperate to be seen, the one who can walk away from uncertainty with grace, the one who doesn't need to be in control of the outcome to feel in control of their life. That kind of confidence is rare, and when someone feels it in you, they remember it, even if they don't say it. Even if it takes them time to realize what they lost, it's in that space after you've stepped back that something interesting happens. The same presence that was once taken for granted becomes noticeable by its absence. The good morning texts that used to be routine are suddenly missed. The attention that used to be effortless is suddenly longed for. And the silence you've created becomes louder than all the words you once said. But again, it's not about making someone miss you. That's not where the power lies. The real shift happens inside of you. Because when you stop chasing, you free yourself from the cycle of needing to be chosen. You stop trying to earn your place in someone's life. You start realizing that your time, your energy, your love, they're not tools to negotiate with, they're gifts. And not everyone deserves access to them. You stop asking what you need to do to be enough, and instead start asking what's enough for you. Is this connection mutual? Are they showing up in ways that make you feel safe and seen? Are you getting back even half of what you give? These aren't selfish questions, they're necessary ones. Because if you don't ask them, you'll keep trying to make something work that was never supposed to require this much force. When you pull your energy back, you create space, not just for someone else to reflect, but for yourself to heal. You start seeing patterns you missed before. You start recognizing what your needs are, not just what you're willing to tolerate. And in that space you grow. You become stronger, clearer, more grounded in who you are and what you truly want. And what you want isn't just to be wanted, it's to be cherished. Not just pursued in moments of loss, but consistently chosen in moments of clarity. And that kind of connection doesn't require chasing. It requires self-awareness. It requires boundaries. It requires the courage to sit with silence instead of forcing attention. Most people are afraid of silence because they think it means nothing is happening. But silence is where truth reveals itself. It's where you see who reaches out without being prompted. It's where you learn who values your presence without needing to be reminded of it. And it's where you realize how powerful you are when you stop pouring yourself into someone who doesn't meet you halfway. The world starts to look different when you reclaim your power. Your energy stops being scattered and starts becoming selective. You no longer try to force connection where there's resistance. You stop begging for clarity from people who benefit from your confusion, and you realize that not everyone deserves to hold the parts of you that you used to give away so freely. There's a quiet kind of strength in knowing when to let go, not because you've given up, but because you've woken up to your worth, to your value, to the truth that you don't need to chase what's already meant for you. That if you pull away, you risk being forgotten, overlooked, replaced, and so they stay close, they stay available, they stay involved, even when the connection no longer feels mutual. Because the fear of being invisible feels more unbearable than the pain of being taken for granted. But here's the truth that so many miss. Sometimes distance isn't a risk, it's the reset, the emotional reset that allows someone to finally see what they've been blind to all along. When you stop chasing, what you're really doing is interrupting a pattern, and patterns by nature are comfortable, predictable, easy to ignore. Someone gets used to your effort, used to the way you fill every gap, used to how you reach out first, or apologize first, or show up first. It becomes expected, it becomes assumed. And with every moment that you try to hold the connection together, you unintentionally make it easier for them not to try at all. But the moment you remove your energy from the equation, everything starts to shift. There's a void, a noticeable absence where your presence used to be. And in that void, someone is finally forced to feel the weight of your absence. Maybe not immediately, maybe not in a dramatic or cinematic way, but quietly, gradually, in the little moments when they look at their phone and it doesn't light up, when they go through something and realize they can't lean on you like they used to, when they feel an emotional discomfort they can't name, only to realize it's the silence you left behind. See, people don't usually realize what they have when it's always, but when it disappears, it creates contrast, and contrast breeds clarity. Suddenly, they start comparing, not to other people, but to how they felt when you were in their life. How safe they felt, how seen they felt, how understood they felt. Even if they couldn't express it at the time, even if they took it for granted, the emotional fingerprint you left behind doesn't just fade. And here's what's powerful. You're not pulling away to manipulate. You're pulling away because your energy deserves somewhere to rest, somewhere to breathe, somewhere it's reciprocated. You're not punishing anyone. You're protecting yourself. You're honoring the effort you've been giving by choosing not to give it where it's no longer valued. That's not weakness. That's growth. When you stop chasing, you stop being the one who always goes first. And that's important, because if someone never has to step forward, they never have to ask themselves what you truly mean to them. They never have to wrestle with the uncertainty, the longing, the vulnerability of wondering where they stand. But once they do, everything changes. They start to notice the space you used to fill. They start to feel the difference between having you and not having you. And that's when the emotional awareness begins. There's something incredibly human about missing someone. It softens defenses. It breaks through ego. It brings forward honesty, not just with others, but with ourselves. When someone misses you, they're no longer in control of the narrative. They're no longer able to dismiss their feelings, because those feelings show up in unexpected ways, in songs, in memories, in the silence that used to be your word. And that kind of reflection only happens when you step back. When you allow someone the space to miss you, you give them a mirror that shows them what they really felt but maybe couldn't admit. Because sometimes people don't appreciate you because they're distracted, confused, or emotionally unavailable. And no amount of chasing can fix that. No amount of effort can force someone to see you clearly if they're still running from their own emotion. But time, space, and absence have a way of revealing truths that proximity never could. It shows who genuinely values you, not just for what you provide, but for who you are. It shows who's willing to come forward once the easy version of the connection is no longer available. And most importantly, it reveals to you who has the emotional maturity to meet you where you are, not just when it's convenient, but when it requires intentionality. You'll find that stepping back doesn't just give them space, it gives you perspective. You begin to see things more clearly too. You start to notice how much you were carrying. You reflect on how often you made excuses for behavior that left you anxious or uncertain. And you realize how peaceful it feels to no longer be in that emotional loop. You no longer obsess over their attention, because your attention is finally coming home to your needs, your growth, your emotional well-being. And ironically, it's in that emotional detachment that your presence becomes more powerful than ever. You're no longer chasing, and in doing so you become unforgettable, because true value isn't loud, it's not in grand gestures or overgiving, it's in the consistency, the integrity, the calm self-assurance of someone who knows what they bring to the table and isn't afraid to eat alone. So when you stop chasing, when you retreat into your own self-worth, you're not losing them, you're letting them find you, not the you that begged to be seen, but the you that stood tall in silence. The one who finally realized that being missed is not about making someone feel your absence, it's about recognizing that your presence was never meant to be begged for in the first place. We often mistake action for progress. We think if we just do enough text first, check in often, keep showing up, we can secure our place in someone's life. But the truth is, effort doesn't always equal value in the eyes of someone who hasn't yet decided to appreciate you. When you're always the one showing up, you remove the space for the other person to notice your absence, and sometimes that absence is the very thing that makes the difference. Because when someone no longer has immediate access to your energy, they're left to sit with their own thoughts, their own feelings, and that silence often speaks louder than anything you could say. Chasing can become a habit disguised as love. It looks like care, it feels like commitment, but at its core it's often fear. Fear of being forgotten, fear of being replaced, fear that if we don't maintain the connection, it will fall apart. But what we fail to realize is that healthy relationships are never sustained by one-sided effort. They thrive when both people lean in, not just out of convenience, but out of conscious choice. When you stop chasing, you make space for the other person to choose you freely. You allow the bond to be tested, not by drama, but by distance. And if it survives that test, it becomes real. Someone can only miss you when you're no longer where they expect you to be. That doesn't mean you disappear out of punishment. It means you shift your energy inward. Instead of focusing on how to get someone to respond, you start responding to your own needs. You recognize that being emotionally available doesn't mean being endlessly accessible. You can care deeply and still protect your peace. And ironically, that emotional boundary creates more intrigue than any message ever could. It's in your stillness that your power becomes magnetic. When you're no longer chasing, you're no longer easy to ignore. You're not feeding the dynamic that lets them be passive. You're not chasing validation. You're embodying value, the kind of value that says, I want connection, but I won't beg for it. That kind of energy is rare, and rare things are always remembered. There's a reason so many people only realize someone's worth after they're gone. When they were always there, it was easy to overlook, easy to take for granted. But when that constant presence disappears, they feel the vacuum. They miss the emotional safety. They miss the effortless support. They miss the attention that once felt so automatic. And in that gap, something shifts. Curiosity replaces comfort. Questions replace assumptions. And in those quiet moments of reflection, the emotional truth starts to catch up with them. You're not trying to manipulate. You're allowing reality to teach what words couldn't. You're not teaching them a lesson. You're giving them a moment to see what their life looks like without you constantly pouring in. And more importantly, you're giving yourself a moment to recognize how much you've been giving to someone who may not have even asked themselves if they're ready to receive it. When you chase, you train people. You teach them that they don't have to invest to keep you, that your presence is guaranteed no matter how they show up. And over time, that dynamic starts to feel uneven. You begin to resent the lack of effort while they become numb to the privilege of your attention. But when you stop chasing, you flip the script. You show that your time and energy are earned, not assumed. You demonstrate that connection is a two-way street, and if someone wants to stay in your life, they'll have to walk towards you too. This shift doesn't just affect the other person, it transforms you. You begin to trust yourself more. You become less reactive, more grounded. You stop trying to read into every word, every delay, every signal. Instead, you let things unfold. You observe. You pay attention. And in doing so, you protect your energy from being drained by uncertainty. You learn to stay curious without being consumed. You learn to hold space for someone without losing space for yourself. And eventually, if they do miss you, if they realize what they've lost, you're no longer in a place of desperation. You're in a place of clarity. You're no longer asking, will they come back? But do they deserve a place in the life I'm building now? Because the distance didn't just give them perspective, it gave you standards. And that's how you win. Not by getting them back, but by never losing yourself in the process. You don't have to chase someone to be unforgettable. You don't have to overextend to prove your worth. Real love, real connection, it recognizes value without needing to be reminded constantly. It shows up not because it's pushed, but because it wants to, and when someone wants to come back into your life, they'll find their way. But this time you'll be watching not with hope alone, but with wisdom. You'll see their effort for what it is, not as a performance, but as a reflection of their growth. And if they haven't grown, you'll be okay walking away, because you've already returned to the one person who will never leave you behind again, yourself. One of the biggest shifts in your life will happen the moment you stop trying to convince anyone of your value. That single decision changes how you walk, how you talk, how you respond, and more importantly, how you love. There is a quiet power in knowing that you don't need to fight for someone's attention because you've already decided you are enough, with or without it. And that shift, it's what makes people start to feel your absence before they even realize they lost your presence. When you chase, you enter a mindset that says someone else has the power to complete or validate your experience. You start responding to their silence instead of listening to your intuition. You ignore the effort you're putting in and hope the outcome justifies the exhaustion. But as soon as you stop, the energy realigns. You begin to notice things again, how you feel, what you need, what makes you light up outside of that connection. You begin to reconnect with the parts of yourself that were drowned out by overthinking, overgiving, overanalyzing. It's not about pretending to be unavailable. It's about becoming truly occupied with yourself, your goals, your friendships, your purpose. Not to make anyone jealous or reactive, but because life is too short to spend circling someone who hasn't made the decision to meet you halfway. And when you stop circling them, something very interesting happens. They feel the pull of your absence, not because you created a gap to be petty, but because your consistency had become part of their emotional safety net, and now it's no longer there. Letting go of the chase doesn't mean letting go of love. It means letting go of the need to perform for it. You stop being the one who fills every silence, who fixes every discomfort, who carries the emotional weight of both people. You start allowing things to be mutual or not at all. You start believing that if it's real, it won't need to be forced. And if it has to be forced, it probably isn't worth your peace. So many people live in fear of detachment, afraid that the second they stop texting first, calling first, planning everything, it'll all fall apart. But here's the truth. If it falls apart the moment you stop chasing, it was never stable to begin with. You were holding it up with effort that wasn't being returned. And when it falls, it may hurt, but that's also your liberation. Because now you're free from the illusion that what you had was healthy just because it was consistent. The confidence you build when you stop chasing doesn't come from getting someone back. It comes from getting yourself back. You remember what it feels like to be grounded in your own worth. You remember that silence isn't rejection, it's information, and distance isn't punishment, it's perspective. You stop trying to decode their behavior and you start noticing your own. You start realizing how often you were shrinking, softening or settling just to keep things going. And you're no longer available for that version of love. When someone starts to feel your absence, they begin to reflect. They begin to realize you weren't just available, you were consistent, you weren't just nice, you were invested. You didn't just show up, you brought peace, support and energy that made their life feel more stable. And that's not something they find everywhere, that's not something they can replace overnight. But the key here is that you're no longer waiting around for them to notice, because now you're too busy becoming everything you once tried to prove. When you stop chasing, you don't become colder, you become clearer. You don't love less, you love smarter. You don't lose your softness, you protect it. You start building your life on your terms. And from that space, you no longer need to beg for love. You attract it by simply being aligned with who you are and what you deserve. That's not strategy, it's self-respect. That's not manipulation, it's maturity. And that kind of energy is unforgettable, even in your absence. This isn't about playing games. It's not about withholding love or pretending not to care. It's about emotional growth, the kind that sets boundaries without building walls, the kind that honors connection without sacrificing self-respect. When you stop chasing, you're not trying to manipulate the outcome. You're choosing to align your actions with your truth. You're saying I matter too, without shouting it. You're letting go of the need to overfunction in relationships that don't function back. And that decision, that subtle but powerful shift, creates space for a different kind of energy, one where you don't need to win love. You attract it through grounded presence. There's a big difference between creating distance to teach someone a lesson and stepping back because you finally learned yours. You're no longer trying to be chosen, you're choosing peace, choosing clarity, choosing to no longer beg for crumbs in places where you deserve the full meal. You stop operating from fear of losing them, fear of being alone, fear of being misunderstood. Instead, you start operating from strength that says I'm not afraid to walk away from anything that asks me to abandon myself. What people often misunderstand is that not chasing doesn't mean not caring. It means you've realized that your love doesn't have to be proven through sacrifice. It's already enough. You've stopped chasing because you've stopped needing validation from someone who hasn't earned the right to influence your sense of self. And that's not arrogance, that's maturity. That's the recognition that real love doesn't require performing, it requires presence. And presence flows naturally when two people meet each other with equal energy. Growth means no longer reacting to every silence with anxiety, but using it as a moment to check in with yourself. Growth means no longer thinking you need to do more to be enough. Growth means trusting that if someone truly values you, your stillness won't scare them, it'll inspire them to meet you where you are. And if they don't, you've just created space for someone who will. You're not playing hard to get. You're finally becoming hard to forget. Because nothing is more unforgettable than a person who loves deeply, gives generously, but knows exactly when to walk away, not out of bitterness but out of wisdom. That kind of person doesn't chase, they don't need to, they know their worth. And that's exactly what makes others remember them long after they're gone. When you stop chasing, you're not giving up on love, you're giving up on losing yourself. You're no longer fighting for someone else's attention because you've already claimed your own. That decision sends a powerful message, not just to others but to the world. I am enough as I am. And in that quiet confidence you don't need to beg, prove or plead. You simply become unforgettable, not because you chased, but because you didn't have to.